You wouldn't believe what happened to me when I was at this old barn in New Jersey. Seriously, it's so weird and hard to believe. But you can decide that for yourself. I'm just going to tell you what I witnessed. I was fixing up an old barn. To be honest, it probably would have been better to just tear it down and build a new one. But the owner loved the barn's history and wanted things to stay as they were. So that's what we did. Plus, I wasn't going to turn down the job. Money's money. So I was fixing up this old barn, right? About a week in, I noticed something weird one morning. There was this rotten wood plank that had fallen off, and it seemed like there was a secret passageway behind it in the barn wall. I got really curious, so I made the hole bigger and went in. We had to remove that part anyway, so no harm done. Wow, it was like stepping back in time. Inside was a room that time seemed to forget. The place was really dusty and dirty, but I was pumped. You don't come across a secret room in a building, especially in an old barn, every day. The room had drawings on its walls, pictures of some strange creature. It looked a bit like a deer, but had these huge wings that didn't look like a bird's at all. Its wings were kind of like a bat's, or a dragon's if you're into that sort of thing. It had a long, skinny body with hooves, but it didn't look like any animal I've ever seen before. Its face was a bit distorted and slightly resembled a goat or a horse. It was so weird staring at them. Super creepy. I looked around the room more, feeling pumped. There were all these old stuff set out like in a museum. Pottery, homemade tools, bones, antique junk. I found weird writings on the walls and floor, but I had no idea what they meant. Honestly, it looked like some sort of spell room, and I wanted to just leave and forget the whole thing. While I was deep in thought, I suddenly felt really uncomfortable. It just hit me out of the blue. I got chills and the room felt weird, as if something bad was about to happen. I felt something was off. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head. I took up my flashlight to look around the room and make sure I was actually alone. I've run into animals while working before, and it's not a blast. I thought maybe my jitters were from a raccoon or a possum hanging around, but then I heard this low growl. I slowly turned to it, holding my flashlight. The next thing I saw, I'll never forget. There it was, inside the light beam, an actual creature. It was identical to the one in the drawings, right there, live. Close up, I could tell it had scales on its chest and back, kind of like a living shield. The scales on its legs eventually turned into fur. It had a mane running down its neck and back with huge wings popping out from its shoulders. Its face was a weird mix of a goat, horse, and a goblin, and it was long and thin. It kind of looked like a greyhound's nose when I think about it. It seemed like a gross mix of so many different animals. I had no clue what to think. I just stood there looking at it, not believing what I was seeing. The creature was really skinny, almost like a skeleton. Its wings seemed damaged, reminded me of bat wings, plus it stank like sulfur and burnt hair. It was super gross and scary. It was staring at me but didn't look bothered at all. It was sticking its tongue out like a snake, as if it was trying to smell everything around it. When I figured out what it was, I freaked out and ran straight to my car. The thing didn't even look like it wanted to chase me. After that, I swore I'd never set foot in that barn again. My buddies thought I'd lost it, but I didn't give a damn. The guy who owned the place was pissed when I dropped the job, but there was no chance I was going back in there. I had loads of questions, but there's no way I was going back to find answers. That's a job for the monster hunters, not me. But one thing always bugs me. Who made those drawings? Did they know that creatures or something? The sketches were pretty clear, so I bet the person who did them saw this thing more than once. Maybe they even idolized it or something. Gives me the creeps just thinking about it. On reflection, I'm sure that creature was the Jersey Devil. Maybe it was some kind of demon or something. Either way, I'm not planning to go looking for it, and I really don't want to see that monster again. You know, some things should just be left alone. A few years ago, I went on a solo drive around Arizona during a full moon. I've always wanted to do a road trip across the Myuu, Yes, just me and my car, and I specifically chose to do it during a full moon. I also drove through the Coconino National Forest. If you've never heard of it, it's a huge forest in Arizona with giant ponderosa pines and big red rock formations. It looks like they were shaped by something ancient. The GPS pointed to a tiny road splitting off from the main street, right into the forest. The choice was between a smooth highway and a barely seen dirt road in a thick forest in the middle of the night, but it wasn't a tough call. It was captivating to drive through the forest with the full moon's light shining through the pine trees. It was so quiet. No noise from insects or the wind. Even my old car seemed to stop making noise. I started to feel pretty uncomfortable, and there was this weird smell that I couldn't recognize. It didn't smell like pine or fresh mountain air like you'd expect in the wild. It smelled really strong, like sulfur. I drove a bit further, with the windows down, listening to Bob Seger on the radio and trying to shake off this weird feeling I had. I mean, I was out here for some excitement, so I figured the uneasiness was just because I was alone. But then I heard something. Suddenly, there was a quiet growl that seemed to come from all directions at once. The growl turned into a howling sound that bounced around the quiet woods. Before I could figure out what was happening, it got really hot. It felt like I was nearing a big fire, but that couldn't be. There was no way a fire could start here. But the further I drove, the hotter it got. Something weird was happening, and I realized this night was more than I bargained for. I wasn't just lost in the woods. I felt like I was losing myself. The moon was shining so brightly that its shadows were blending weirdly with my car's headlights. It was getting really hot, to the point where even the steering wheel felt too hot to hold when I saw this bright light up ahead. That's when I spotted it. There was this creepy creature crossing my path some distance ahead, outlined by the moonlight. It looked exactly like something from a horror movie, and it wasn't some sort of trick played by my imagination. It was real. It was about as big as a small horse, but built more like a dog, really skinny but with lots of muscles. It cast scary shadows all around me. Its skin was a mix of dark red fur that looked all matted and gross, and bits that looked like rotting flesh. It was really disgusting. Just looking at it made me feel sick. And those eyes, man. They were flaming red and super intense. It made this freaky howling sound again that just bounced around the whole forest. The quiet night became creepy real quick. And guess who was there to see all of it? Yep, me. So, the chase began. The monster roared and two others joined it. They just popped out from the dark. Now I had 3 scary dogs in front of me, and it looked like I was their target. Trying to start my Chevy was risky, especially with those creepy dogs nearby. They were super quick, keeping up with my car. It got hotter every second, and the smell of burning was heavy. I was freaking out, driving as fast as I could on that dirt road, hoping my car would protect me. After what felt like forever, I finally got out of the woods and into an open field. The temperature dropped right away and the horrible smell disappeared. When checking my mirror, I saw the glowing eyes of the wild dogs disappear into the dark forest. Feeling shaken up, I stopped the car to get a grip, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. It got quiet again, and I felt a nice warm feeling. Man, I was relieved. Seriously, I could have been toast back there. You know, when I think about it, under that huge moon, was I really lost in the woods, or did I just find something crazy? Anyway, I'm sticking to main roads on my next trips. Look, I get it sounds crazy, and I might not believe it myself if someone else told me. But those bright eyes in the dark forest and that scary howl, they were not made up. Now every time I go for a drive or see a new path, it reminds me of it. And that's about it. I happened across something puzzling in the quiet woods of the Coconino National Forest. Joshua Tree National Park has all the desert beauty you can find in Southern California. I liked it so much that I decided to work there with the National Park Service. It was great for a while, but then things changed. There's this big rock in Joshua Tree that's a really popular tourist spot. It's as big as a small house and looks like a skull, with its large hollow parts looking out over the park. I really like that rock. I kind of feel like it might love me back. Sounds weird, right? Gives me the chills just saying it. Just listen, okay? Because it could be true. If it isn't love, it's just as powerful. Generally, if you want to see Joshua's stone head, you've got to go through groups of tourists and stand in line just to get a quick picture. If you get there really early or really late, there might be fewer people around. But when I was working at the park, I found the best times to see the stone were before sunrise or after sunset. It looks nicer at night, with the stars and distant city lights of California lighting it up. I was on my way to the stone when I saw him off the trail, the guy who ruined it all for me. He had on raggedy clothes that seemed really old. He was barefoot and had long, tangled hair. He did not talk to me or ask for help. He just stood there without moving right at the trail's edge, just waiting. "Hey, what's your name?" I had asked him. "What are you up to out here?" The park was empty. The tourists had left about an hour ago. This guy seemed like he just came from the desert. When he didn't respond, I touched him. He wasn't hot. He was as cold as the air around us. He seemed out of place. But he didn't say anything. I called my team on the radio real quick. I described him and said we needed emergency transport right away. When I turned around, the guy had disappeared. The only thing left was his footprints in the dirt. I tried to find any hint path to find him again, but there was just nothing. I was by myself when I heard a howl. Even though wolves aren't usually found in the popular parts of the park, I still look around to see if I could spot one. The sound was sort of like a dog's howl. But what I saw, that was no dog. It was on two legs, long like a human. Even though it was far away, I could tell this thing must have been almost 7 feet tall. It howled once more, louder this time. I could clearly see its snout and jaw against the dim light in the distance, so I did what anyone would do. I ran like hell. I only knew to head to the skull. I ran as fast as possible, making a mess on the track. I took shortcuts across the rough areas, crushing the bushy plants. I didn't dare look back, but I was sure it was following me. I heard its claws cutting through the stems and stalks that I was stepping on with my boots. I could even feel its deep, heavy breath shaking my body. I didn't think I'd ever see my life flash before my eyes, especially with my job. Looking after tourist spots isn't usually risky for a park ranger. That night, I remembered everything. I thought about my 5th birthday and my dad's funeral. I remembered my partner and our kid. I felt like I was chasing these moments, wanting to create more such memories, but actually, I was going in a different direction. I was running towards the huge skull in the middle of the desert. I eventually reached it, looking up at its large, rounded top that towered over me. I saw its eye holes, and what looked a bit too much like teeth for my liking. I know the skull isn't haunted or anything. It doesn't have a spirit in it. People usually talk about these ideas when they visit Joshua Tree for the first time, but none of them are true. But it could be sacred or a safe place, who knows? I was running up the hill near the stone, and when I was about to reach it, I lost my footing and fell. I face-planted into the ground and thought I was done for. I managed to roll onto my shoulder and look back. The monster wasn't there. It wasn't behind me, ready to finish me off. It wasn't just hanging around the edges, ready to pounce at the right moment. It simply disappeared, like the skull scared it off. I moved back a bit towards the desert and saw more footprints in the dirt. They were human footprints, not shod in any footwear. When my friends showed up ready to take the stranger to our clinic, I was freaking out. I couldn't stop blabbering about what I had seen, even when weeks had passed. After that, they let me go from the job and asked me to look after my mental health. They basically kicked me out and told me to shut up. So I'm chatting about this for a reason. Mostly because someone doesn't want the guy in the desert to be common knowledge. There's got to be a reason they're trying to keep it hushed up, don't you think? Someone's trying to keep it a secret that the skull-shaped rock in Joshua Tree might be looking out for us. I've been into survival stuff since I was a scout. I'm a big outdoors person. It feels like home to me. Once I took a risk and filmed myself trying to survive alone in the forests of Oregon. I've always liked the wild, untouched feel of nature and wanted to share that with others. It's really crazy out there. I was just there with all these huge trees and the sounds of nature. It was really calm with only the noise of a stream nearby, birds chirping, and the wind blowing through the pine branches. You could practically feel the clean air. My day-to-day out there was pretty basic. I woke up at sunrise, scrounged up some nuts or berries for breakfast, and then started filming. I'd record me doing normal camping stuff like setting traps and making fires, basic survival things. But it wasn't just about showing the technical parts. It was also about sharing the difficult and exciting emotions that came from living like our ancestors did, grinding through each day just trying to survive. The only company I had were my cameras, watching and recording everything I did, sharing in my alone time. I walked away from my main campsite near the river one day to check out the wilderness a bit more. I usually do this to get used to the area, understand what's around, and find out what I can use. But that day felt a bit off, even though I couldn't exactly tell why. As I went further into the forest, the atmosphere became sort of heavy and weirdly calm. Sometimes I would smell something really bad. It was so awful it could ruin your breakfast. I had never smelled anything like this before. I kept going, staying alert like anyone who knows how to survive would. I filmed everything I saw. I noticed a big, unusual dent in the bushes. Maybe it was made by an animal. Sometimes you see shapes like that where deer have been lying, but this shape was way bigger than any deer I've ever seen. I jotted it down in my mind and moved on. You gotta always keep an eye on what's around you. You never can tell what's waiting in the bushes. Living out here in the wilderness, you just can't guess what's gonna happen next. Just a short distance from the bushes, I heard a loud noise that echoed across the open area. I'm not the type to get scared easily. I've bumped into all sorts of animals out here, but this was different. The entire place had a weird, creepy vibe. I was alone out there, miles away from anyone. If I ran into any trouble, I'd have to handle it on my own. Hearing weird noises in the woods is one thing, but actually coming face to face with a dangerous animal, that's a whole different story. I felt like something was watching me but couldn't tell where it was. You know how it feels when you think someone is watching you? Well, this felt like I was being hunted. Things around me didn't seem right. I heard some loud footsteps as the sun was setting and saw some moving shadows by the trees. I heard some creepy sounds from afar that made me pretty cautious, but I couldn't figure out where they were coming from. When I got back to camp, I felt more worried. The stinky smell was super strong near my place. No food was eaten from my stash, but stuff was moved around. It was obvious that something or someone had been there. I had put up some trail cameras around my camp, mostly to film myself while I was building my spot and doing other stuff around there. So I thought I'd check the videos from my spy cams, right? Didn't expect to see anything at first, just regular stuff. But out of the blue, some huge, bulky thing popped up on the screen. This big beast standing on two thick legs, like 8 or 9 feet tall, I reckon. It was built like a tank and it was covered in this reddish-brown hair, but it definitely wasn't a bear. When I paused the video, I saw this face that was totally out there. It was like looking at some crazy mix of a man and an ape, or maybe some distant relative far back in our evolutionary timeline. It had a big forehead and deep-set eyes that looked really smart. Its eyes looked too small for its face, but weirdly, they looked like human eyes. Its jaw was big with a pointy chin sticking out. This realization made me nervous and excited at the same time. I was in the woods with Bigfoot. I felt like I was intruding. I was worried that the sounds it made were telling me to leave, and I was honestly scared. After watching the video, even someone doubtful like me had to admit the truth. It was too late to leave that night, so I stayed put in my camp and just hoped the creature wouldn't bother me. After a rough night, I thought it best not to push my luck. So I packed up and left. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. People find it hard to believe what my camera captured, and honestly, if I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. Sometimes when I look back at the videos, it reminds me that we're not really alone. The wild is way crazier than we can actually understand. I was planning to go camping alone this winter. I know it sounds nuts, but with the right gear, winter camping can be a blast. Also, I got new camping stuff for Christmas and I was too excited to wait until summer to give it a go. It's been some time since I last used my four-season tent for winter camping. I plan to go to a campsite in the local state forest about 5 miles away from the main road. The trails weren't maintained during that time of the year, so I had to use snowshoes to get in. It was tough work, but the good thing about camping in winter is that you can put all of your stuff on a sled, so there's no need for backpacks. There weren't any cars or people around in the parking lot because, well, who likes to camp in freezing weather? Once I got my campsite sorted out and cleared the snow, it started to look really good. There's supposed to be a nice snowshoe trail along the river nearby. I'm pumped to check it out tomorrow. The forest is usually quieter in the winter because snow dampens the noise. But when I went for a hike, I realized that I didn't see any wildlife around. At that time, it didn't seem too odd to me, but now when I look back, I realize something was off right from the start. I was just getting water boiling for dinner when I heard something overhead. Some shadow moved by, but I couldn't see what caused it. It was big, though. Could have been an eagle or a big owl. I couldn't find it, you know. My camp was all trees, so seeing a big bird wasn't weird. Nothing else happened that night. I just snuggled in my sleeping bag and stayed warm. I was close to falling asleep when I heard something weird. It was the sound of a bird flapping its wings, but the thing is, it sounded like it was right outside the tent. I grabbed my headlamp and began to open the tent to scare off whatever was out there. I didn't see anything at first, so I put on my boots and stepped just outside to have a look. I didn't want to be out for too long because it was starting to get chilly. I shined my light towards the woods. I didn't spot anything in the trees, but I saw a reflection close to the ground. There were eyes shining back at me. I didn't notice the creature at first because it was standing between the trees. Its eyes were the only thing that gave it away. If you didn't pay much attention, it seemed like a small tree among the others, but it wasn't. I realized it appeared more like a dark silhouette of a man, but with wings. The eyes were approximately at the same height as mine. I figured out it wasn't a person because human eyes don't glow like that. It was like when you point a flashlight at a cat in the dark. It was looking right at me, but it didn't budge. I yelled to try and frighten it, but it just stood there, frozen and staring back. I didn't carry anything but a tiny pocket knife and began to freak out about defending myself if required. Maybe I could bash it with my gas tin, I'm not sure. I couldn't leave until morning. Also, I had to pass by the thing to get out. I didn't want to just hide in my tent because then I couldn't see what it was up to. But I didn't really have a better choice because I wasn't ready for the cold. So that's what I did. I stayed up the whole night, but it didn't bother me again. When I was packing up camp in the morning, I checked for any signs of it. I saw no tracks, but I did find a bunch of little animal bones arranged in a circle around my campfire. I'm not really good at telling what bones belong to which animals, but they might have been from a raccoon or a fox. After seeing that, I didn't stick around for anything else. I packed up my stuff super fast and took off. I could hear wings fluttering while leaving, but still didn't see anything. I didn't stick around to figure it out. Honestly, I don't really get what was happening. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends or family. They'd never buy that I saw some Birdman thing in the woods. So there's no exciting end to it. I couldn't figure out what that creature wanted or what all those bones were about. It didn't really attempt to hurt me. It knew where I was all night. If it wanted me gone, I'd be gone. Not sure if I wandered into its space or camped out in its home or something, but I can tell you that I'll never go back there again. If its goal was to scare me away, it totally succeeded. I'm sure about hypnosis. Don't you think we need to in this modern time? The whole white line fever thing proves it. You can't deny it. You know when you've been driving for a long time and you reach where you're going but can't remember how you got there. That's like being hypnotized. It's like your mind checks out and your body just keeps doing what it's used to do. Sometimes you just zone out. You might blank out for about 10 minutes or during your long commute, maybe even for an hour. But there's always an end to it, right? Your brain basically taps in. It reconnects with your body to ensure that autopilot hasn't led you off a ledge or something. In situations like this, it's okay to forget the past 10 minutes. But then again, I can't remember more than 10 minutes. Heck, there are whole 3 days I can't remember. Doesn't seem like a lot in a lifetime, but to me it's a lot. It wasn't a drinking spree or even a mishap. I lost 3 days. I recall heading home on I-90 through South Dakota after vacationing in Montana. I was halfway through the drive, not feeling tired, but I was the only one on the road. I kept seeing things, you know how it is. Each time I saw headlights coming over the hill, it seemed like such a big thing. When they were really far and looked tiny, I wished I was nearing a city. I-90's pretty boring, so a city would have been a nice distraction. But every time it was just the headlights of another car heading my way. We crossed paths and then just moved on, not knowing each other. This happened for like an hour. Then 3 flickering lights showed up across the skyline. They were all different colors and were spaced out too much to be headlights of a car. They blinked, flashed, and just faded into darkness. I recall turning the radio off and using the windshield wipers. Something was off about those lights. They weren't just moving towards me, they were lifting from the ground. They were going up too far to just be some illusion. 3 lights, yellow, blue, and red. Their brightness kept changing. They began to rotate like they were on the edge of a huge frisbee. I muttered to myself, wondering what the heck I'd stumbled upon. I recall driving under these lights. I remember poking my head out of the car window to get a good look at whatever was floating above me. It was as big as 2 buses lined up one after the other. The flashing lights showed it was made of smooth black metal. There were no joints or visible connections. It was just one big solid piece. I think another light came down. I had to cover my eyes from something bright. I slammed on the brakes suddenly. If it was another car, no one ever reported anything. I felt as if I was dropping. Next thing I know, I was back home. Just like that, I was home. I was even standing in my regular grocery store holding a milk gallon. I accidentally busted the milk carton and it got all over my shoes. Those weren't the shoes I had on in the car, though. It was still pretty bright outside. Turns out it wasn't the day after, but 3 days later. According to my boss, I got back home right on time. I was at the right place at the right time. I chatted with my friends and family. I was telling everyone about Montana and my calm ride back home. But it wasn't really me talking because I didn't even touch on the sky's lights. For the next 3 days, I was just going through the motions. It was like I was on autopilot. Car life. I guess there's no reason to question if my body was actually here. Everyone tells me it was, so why should I disagree? But it still doesn't feel correct. I went to a doctor because I thought I was losing it. But there's nothing wrong with my brain or sleep. Psychologically, I'm all good. But yeah, I've got this new scar. I recently noticed a straight line down my neck close to my backbone. I had an x-ray and ended up having surgery. Now I've got a metal plate joining 2 of my spine bones. I've looked at the scans myself. When I touch my neck, I can feel it. But it shouldn't be there. Nobody has any record of the surgery. I'm sure there wasn't any car crash. My car is fine and I wasn't in the hospital. If I had surgery in the last 3 days, I wouldn't be healed by now. But what else could it be? I noticed the lights in the vehicle before I got home earlier than usual. I went through 3 days without even noticing. I keep asking myself what snapped me out of it. What made me actually tune back into what was going on? All I was doing was going to the grocery store, as far I know. Did they just get tired of me? Did they first take care of physical stuff and then gave more time to mind stuff? Did they enjoy what they discovered? 3 days is quite long, though. It feels like I've been out of control for ages. I can't even figure out what I was thinking all this while when I was wandering these streets. Where have I been? What have I been doing? What's happening to me? I know I can't get back the lost time. Can someone please tell me if it's all over? I don't want to be scared of what's coming at the end.